Today, first of all, my name is Christy Danner, and I am a counselor at Scotts Valley High School. I've been here for about 10 years. I really appreciate and value your time as an administrator. Watching my own administrators during this time, who I have great respect for, has been a really eye-opening experience. So thank you for your dedication and commitment to us and your students. As a school counselor during the school closure, I have really had the unique opportunity to connect with my students on a new and different level. I learned a lot about my students, but I've also learned a lot about myself and what I find most meaningful in my own profession. I sort of became the hope salesperson to many of my students. I created deep connections with them through our shared experiences, which was really a gift to me during this time. I hope to share with you today what I learned and what I feel we need to focus on going forward to ensure all of our students have what they need to be happy and healthy and hopeful and balanced learners. So this is our agenda today. And throughout the presentation, I will be periodically showing slides that have been designed just for students. They'll be denoted with a red student slide under the slide header. These slides are really meant to complement the subject matter by showing an example of how a teacher or counselor can lead the student to a better understanding of the challenge they may be facing and really create some awareness around their own well-being. So before I start my presentation, I feel like it's critical to really frame our conversation around student equity, inclusion, and educational reform. I know that as an administrator, these conversations are at the front and center of every school closure debrief meeting and every fall planning meeting you are a part of. They're important. But I feel like my presentation would be void of humanity and intelligence, perspective, and compassion without mentioning the larger historical, societal, and political failures that we saw magnified during the school closure. The things that we know for sure that happened during school closure was those pre-existing inequities were really magnified with our most vulnerable populations. And we're going to be getting a lot of kids back who've experienced trauma either through hunger, housing, violence, especially for families that were impacted by the economic downturn. With the George Floyd murder and the social unrest that's happening right now in our country, I think it's a critical time in our school community to make a decision about how to stand up to racism and discrimination together and really create a shared message to give to students and parents about the expectations around these values. I feel there's some real small but impactful acts that we can do at the school level, like being real clear and loud with students and families about our policies around slurs used at school, finding opportunities to have conversations about microaggressions, and empower our teachers by providing professional development opportunities to teach them how to respond to these conversations and potential acts of hate in their own classroom. So this slide shows an example of a survey that we put out. So a couple of weeks into the school closure, we made the decision to send out a student wellness check survey. This was instrumental in being able to measure our students' social, emotional, and academic health. I found that the results of the survey gave us some real clear data about who was struggling and where we needed to prioritize our time. It was kind of the connections and the conversations and experiences with these students that came out of the survey that created the data showing us what our students were struggling most with at home. Of course, this is not 100% scientific, but school counselor has instincts and they're strong, and it became really one of our only ways of taking our students' temperature and without them being right in front of us. The response rate was really great, and I learned a lot about getting information out to students through this experience. We ended up having our English teachers post this on our Google Classroom. We also emailed everybody, but making it an actual assignment that was due really helped us getting responses back. So during the school closure, my counseling partner and I, there's two of us here, had to really reimagine and reframe our practice into something new. It was like starting a brand new job in many ways. All of our rituals, our habits, and our muscle memory was gone. And it was important to remind ourselves what our professional goals were, and this helped us really focus and strategize around supporting students. We had to realize that our goals as counselors that you can see on the screen will most likely be similar to what our teachers' goals will probably look like when we start back in the fall. What this experience has taught us is that our students' social, emotional, and physical health will be the priority when talking about their success in the future. Out of our experiences, we found the three challenges that impacted our student learning the most were hope, motivation, and connection. So let's talk about these. So as recently as January, I was fretting and worrying about my students' level of hope and their positive future thinking. Students have been very open to me about these feelings, but it was a couple of back-to-back events that happened at school that made me even more aware about the extent of fear and anxiety that our students are feeling. One day our principal found a love note on the ground and brought it to me. And it was unlike any love note I've ever seen between one teenager to another. It was a boy professing his love to a girl, but he mentioned climate change in it, which was so interesting because I think it was something about I need to let you know how I feel in case our planet is, explodes tomorrow. So I thought that was really impactful to see that. I also had an English teacher come to me with a journal entry from a student, and part of the journal entry was to talk about their greatest fears and their greatest hopes and their best memories. And what really struck me in this journal entry was the student's greatest fear. And his greatest fear was getting murdered, which was definitely not one of my greatest fears when I was a kid, but it just shows the level of fear and anxiety our kids have around school shooting and violence in our world right now. So I had already made the realization that the subject of hope might be something important to study and promote going into next year. And this experience has only magnified that desire to push hope on people. I think we can all agree that optimism or optimists can be slightly annoying, right? But hopeful people are unique in that they understand that universal suffering and injustice exists, but they have an unyielding belief that humans have the agency to make impactful changes in their life. So it's really important to understand that hope is not just wishful thinking, but really a positive motivational state that's based on goals and goal making. The hope theory shows that there's really a strong correlation between a student's level of hope and their subjective well-being. Hopeful thinking has really shown through research that it allows people to make commitments and set goals and really work towards attaining their goals, which is so important for our students. So as school counselors, we observed that a student's level of hope correlated with their sense of safety and balance, creating a type of protective barrier for them. Every single soul that went into the school closure experiment went in with a different level of hope threshold already. This includes teachers and parents and administrators. High hope individuals seem to fare way better during this time because they typically have greater problem-solving abilities and they use fewer disengagement strategies. They use positive self-talk. They're their own cheerleaders, right? I can do this, I won't give up. And they're typically interested in other people's goals along with their own, which makes them really great friends and makes them really good people to be around. Our low hope students tend to be prone to more self-doubt and which can really interfere with studying and getting work done. It also, these students tend to give up more quicker, and they have a hard time changing directions and finding new paths towards success. So we're really trying to get as many students to get more in that high hope category right now. So I would be 100% lying if I said that I have not struggled myself with loss of hope during the past 3 months. I am a school counselor. I am a helper. I'm empathetic in nature. My emotional health is compromised when I see my students and families struggling. And witnessing the murder of George Floyd and the collective suffering in the world that has followed has been beautiful and painful. And I really believe that our job as educators is to promote hope in our school community. We can do this by agreeing on some shared messages with the staff and faculty about hope. And it's really about saying it out loud in staff meetings and making people feel hopeful. So, just saying things like, hey, like, we're family, we belong to each other, we're a community, really de-emphasize individualism right now, and really talk about how can we collectively be successful as a staff or as a classroom. Have teachers talk to their students about that. How can we collectively be successful? And really be honest, let them know, like, we have lost the gift of presence, but we are still able to really plant the seeds of learning in lots of new and unique ways. And most importantly, this more global concept, right? Like, we can't fix all the suffering and injustice in the world, but we can find purpose and meaning and through impacting 1 or 2 students in every class that needs a higher level of support or connection. And that's enough. And that's our goal. So I believe that teachers and school counselors have a shared responsibility to promote and teach hope in the classroom. And here are a couple of ways. I think it's really important that teachers talk about hope and show examples of high hope thinking through media, movies, through own personal stories, through short stories, through narratives. And I think this can really develop an adolescent's hope level. Also, teachers can teach about historic times of crisis, right? And how these ended and how communities have rebounded and become stronger. Teachers and school counselors can also teach lessons on positive psychology, give students a knowledge about those processes that are happening in their brain that make them think and feel and behave. Also having conversations about purpose and the research on happiness and self-compassion are so important. This is our first student slide, and it's a part of a counseling presentation that I created about college and career. But it is such crucial information right now when helping students think about their future with regard to finding meaning and purpose, which is intrinsically linked to hope, right? Like showing them the data. Like, you think this is what's going to make you happy, but actually happy people have good relationships and that have work that's meaningful and find purpose in their careers and have good physical health. It's not about money, and it's not about cars, and it's not about, what our culture is telling you it's about. This is another student slide that from a past presentation I created about mental health. I feel like it has a value and importance when talking about emotional well-being and misconceptions about motivation. It's critical that we talk to our students about how to practice self-compassion, especially in our current social climate. One of my favorite quotes about self-compassion is from a Stanford researcher named Kristen Neff, and she says, "Instead of mercifully judging and criticizing yourself for various inadequacies or shortcomings, self-compassion means that you are kind and understanding when confronted with personal failings." I love that. I love that quote. And I really think, a part of practicing self-compassion is understanding common humanity and learning about common humanity for students. The common humanity we share with every other person in the world can really create connection and diminish feelings of isolation. So creating goals during high school is developmentally appropriate, and the expectations for students to begin the process of goal making is typically high. We find that students who don't know how or get stuck with the goal making process, struggle with balance and health. And the act of goal making has never been more complicated than it is for our teenagers today, because research shows that the ability to generate goals and pathways is really rooted in the understanding that the world is stable and predictable. Newsflash, the world is not stable and predictable right now. This is no longer the case for most students. And really, when you dig even deeper, for many of our students, their world has never been stable and predictable. They live in chaotic homes, they have chaotic existences. And that's why these students have a struggle with creating goals for themselves. So as we go into the school year, and with this promoting hope philosophy, we have to help our students create goals, but it has to be done a different way. I think when we help our students set goals, they have to be very specific and concrete, and with clear indicators that denote progress and success. Goals also can be set in a one day at a time framework. Like we're all living one day at a time. Our goals need to be one day at a time. So that each day students have the opportunity to kind of assess their progress and feel that daily success, I think, is really important. So writing or journaling has always been considered therapeutic. It's a form of creative expression for young people that are like developing their opinions and belief systems. Promoting hope through writing is a kind of a unique and creative way for teachers and counselors to provide kind of a introspective private outlet to express feelings and kind of ruminate about their hopeful thinking. And so here's some writing ideas for teachers to use. And I love the idea of teachers having students write about future events describing a goal they have set, what route they're going to take, potential problems they may encounter, and how they're going to go around those problems and find new ways and new solutions. Adolescents tend to really draw on their own memories of positive experiences to kind of keep them moving forward and keep them buoyant. So we need to kind of allow students to identify their future hopes by reflecting back on successful experiences they've had in the past. Also, when you're doing writing with teenagers, it's really important to provide feedback right away that requires students to kind of reframe negative thoughts with more realistic, positive, and hopeful ones. So I think that's a role of a teacher to be able to say, let's reframe this writing to be a little bit more positive and hopeful. So as teachers start to make connections with their students in the fall, it's critical that they identify students that are disengaged right away. Early intervention is going to be so important in the fall. Obviously, support from a teacher can make a lasting impression on a student's happiness and well-being. We know that already. But it will be more difficult to identify the needs for support and to know if our actions are working with our students. During normal times, we know that students respond positively to teachers that put energy into making their supportiveness obvious, right? So here's some ways teachers can show support in like a digital classroom. And I have about 3 pages of these, there's a lot of them. Students and teachers can email back and forth. And I think it's important for teachers to really remind their students that they're there for them and ask how they can help. I think that teachers need to be really obvious when they're going over material. Like, I'm going to review this concept because I know how difficult it is to learn this way. Or I'm going to remember when we learned how to do this. Like, this is, we're going to do this again because some of you might have forgotten. It's really hard to pay attention online, things like that. It's Also, not a bad idea to offer students an opportunity to exchange phone numbers and allow them to create a classroom group chat. So maybe, creating a small community, but obviously setting rules. Another one would be consider creating a community discussion board for students to share what's happening in their lives, or creating online relational rituals. For example, at the beginning of every class, everyone shares one tough moment, one hopeful moment of the day. Also, creating these habits of hope in your classroom are important. Everybody put in the chat box what you're grateful for today, something like that. Something that, creates a habit is created out of hope. Really important that teachers are greeting students by name. So you got to learn those names. It's going to be hard if we're starting online. And try to find or create a more touch-free or virtual routine, similar to a handshake or a hug or a high five to invite connection. It could be like a thumbs up on the screen or a Zoom background, something like that that shows connection. And I think it's important too that teachers really are talking directly about the importance of connecting with others in their classrooms. Another thing teachers can do is share their own stories. When it's done well, disclosing anecdotes from your own history can really motivate and inspire students. Also, creating potential participation points for students who love points to share a quote about strength or courage or hope. Assigning students to maybe connect with someone in their family about how they stay hopeful. So doing like an informational interview about hope. Students can also be given the lead with this, right? So maybe give them a chance to share what they've learned or a chance to teach their classmates. Have a student teach, a brief self-soothing or mindfulness exercise over Zoom. Posting a welcome to class video daily greeting students and explaining the day is a really good idea. It just opens up with a positive, hopeful expression. Weekly virtual show and tell is a really great idea too. All the students I Zoomed with over the school closure all wanted to show me things in their house, and they all were really proud. And I think this really created a connection between myself and my students. Most importantly, is let them know how much you care, but don't expect anything in return. They're not developmentally ready to give that expression back. So try to remember that and not take things like that personally. So teachers and counselors are really accustomed to the common developmental challenges when working with teenagers. They really understand that students are growing humans who are all experiencing different developmental phases like right in front of us, right? Teachers know that not all 16-year-olds are the same. That would be much easier, right? We joke in our counseling department that we have freshmen that act like seniors and we have seniors that act like freshmen, right? The most beautiful thing about teenagers is that they're all growing and developing into adult people at their own rate. And this is what makes them unique. Development and growth is so important to understand and appreciate when we shift students into a new learning model. And so breaking down the important areas of development and its potential relationship with digital learning seems an important step to start with. So the areas of development that I feel may impact success in distance learning the most would be identity and self-esteem, developmental boredom, and of course, motivation. So I love the student slide because I spend so much time talking with teenagers about their relationships with adults in their life, and mostly parents and teachers. I find it so valuable to talk with teenagers about their developing brain, creating a biological explanation to their frustrations and emotions provide a lot of emotional relief for them. It's also important for adults that have teenagers in their life to remember how much it hurts to feel diminished and disrespected just because of their age. And here's kind of what I feel teenagers need from adults. They need to be taken seriously and treated like they're going somewhere. They need to know that someone is looking beyond their youth. They need to hear that they have a contribution to make, and they need independence and autonomy for sure. That's a big one. This slide is another student slide. It introduces students to the concept of identity and how it develops during adolescence. It's another good example of how we can create self-awareness with our students. Adolescence can be wonky and messy and unstable. These challenges lead to a lowered self-worth, unfortunately. The reasons behind that are fascinating and important to understand when supporting students through difficult times. And there's just about 6 different bullet points about why teenagers have lowered self-esteem, and so I think they're important to go over. Really, teenagers have to let go of those meaningful childhood interests, and that can be very sad for them, but they know they're transitioning to a new level of development. The larger world of experience can be overwhelming, and hello, right now, yes, absolutely, and that can cause lowered self-esteem. Relationships with parents become a lot more contentious, and puberty increases self-consciousness. The responsibilities can be really daunting for teenagers. They feel more freedom, but also that comes with responsibility. They're constantly striving for social belonging in a family of peers that can be comparative and competitive and sometimes kind of cruel. So this is really important information to know when you work with teenagers. Boredom took on a whole new life during the school closure, right? I mean, in fact, our survey showed that boredom was one of the most selected emotions that our students were experiencing. Adolescent boredom is totally normal and natural, and teachers should not ever take this attitude personally. Students are really on a quest to find inspiration and purpose, and we'll need life experience and exposure to new ideas in order to find these things. In the meantime, they'll probably be bored, and they're bored for kind of the similar reasons why they have low self-esteem, which you can see on this slide. So we can't talk about teenage development without talking about motivation. Finding and losing motivation was one of the most common complaints when we spoke with students at school closure. Motivation is mysterious for most people. No matter how hard you try, you cannot convince someone to be motivated. Believe me, I've tried. Motivation kind of lives deeper and within more complicated systems like self-esteem, maturity, purpose, meaning, and future thinking. Finding motivation is very personal and can be different for every student. But really talking to students about the theories around motivation and why they can get stuck and how to get unstuck can help students promote their own motivation. I really love this self-worth theory of motivation. I think I see this a lot in the high school level. And we've all had the experience, right, with that student that is exceptional, but has a row of zeros in the grade book. Really procrastination is rooted from our self-worth, right? The fear of failure can hijack your brain and make someone terrified of performing poorly on the paper because they feel like their value depends on it. So when students procrastinate and put in less effort, they're doing so as a form of self-protection. And I think it's always so interesting. That's strangely flattering when you hear a parent, teacher, or student say, "You've got a lot of potential. You just have to put more time into it," right? And it's actually that's not a compliment, right? Because the student is really struggling with self-worth and is not able to can disconnect their value and their academic output. So this is how I like to explain motivation to my students. They really have a strong desire to make sense of it because it confuses them so much. I really like to blame it on their healthy growing brain, which, teenagers like to blame things on people. So it's good to find an internal thing to blame on. Really, I talk to them about how school can be messy and many days won't work. And their brain is growing, and they're starting to ask bigger, more global questions about their life, right? They're starting to ask questions about like, wait, I'm going to school so I can go to another school. Like, what am I doing this for? What's the point? What do I have that I can give to the world? They start asking those questions about who they are, who their identity is, which is really beautiful. But they're also trying to seek independence and freedom, and they want to make their own choices, and they're starting to question those goals. They, when they were 5, they wanted to be a firefighter, and now they don't know, right? So they're starting to really question things, and they're trying to gain control over more things, which can cause a loss of motivation. So the challenges for teachers and parents when dealing with these developmental obstacles is hard, right? So it's really hard to stay connected with someone who's rapidly changing. And teachers' job is to emphasize the importance of school at a time when their social and physical beings are way more important than academics. And now with the loss of presence, teachers may not know if the student is facing bigger challenges like food and housing insecurity or domestic violence or mental health struggles or drug and alcohol addiction. It's not going to be as apparent. So we really need to help teach our teachers how to identify these things over digital learning. I think that's going to be really important. Some common signs of cognitive slippage during development that we can see in the classroom are, of course, distractibility, consistency, and forgetfulness. So for all of the aforementioned developmental challenges to learning, a student's learning environment can become risky, right? And you add in a new learning environment like digital learning, and you might run into a perfect storm, right? So digital learning environment really amplifies these fears that many students have about school. They don't want to seem stupid. They don't want to make mistakes. They don't want to look foolish. They're afraid of getting evaluated because they don't want to fail. It can take a lot of self-esteem for an adolescent to kind of dare that participation, and teachers really need to make learning safe for speaking up and joining in, especially in the digital classroom is going to be important. Teachers can ease the fears around these risks by creating a safe learning environment with specific classroom norms. So I think it's so important for a teacher to really state clearly, hey, the most important thing to me is that you show up and I see that you're okay. You never have to be worried about coming in prepared. I will never judge your character based on your work output or grades. You got to just say it, right? You got to create these classroom norms around all learning starts with admitting we don't know. You got to value those mistakes, be sensitive to feeling stupid, respect fears of looking foolish, and give real supportive evaluation. Fortunately, there are some strategies teachers can use to promote motivation and engage in their digital classroom. And I feel strongly that these 4 things are things that teachers really need to focus on to make sure they're creating a motivated students. The first one is autonomy. The teenage brain really craves and fights for independence and autonomy. So we have to let students feel some autonomy over the learning. And you can find ways to manufacture a degree of control without making them feel like they're being stifled. So it's really about choice. Creating choice right now, I think, is going to be really important. Competence is important as well. You have to promote competence in your classroom. And I call this making the task frictionless, right? They have to feel like they're being successful and they have the ability to be successful. So I think about this in a way of, have you ever tried to do something frustrating when you're already frustrated, right? So just your level of, losing it happens so quickly. So here's a couple of teacher quotes that I think are important to look at. So if it takes longer than 15 or 20 seconds or more than 2 or 3 sentences to clearly explain what I want students to do, I forget about it or modify the assignment. Another one is whatever assignments or links I place in Google Classroom should only require 1 or at most 2 clicks before students are at the page where they should be able to do the assigned work. So this competence can create confidence in your students. Relatedness is really important too. So you want to ask whether the activity you're doing is really helping them feel connected to others and feel cared about. Positive relationships are really critical during distance learning, especially when students don't really have to connect with you if they don't want to. So we need to really lead with love with this. Relevance is important as well. The schoolwork has to be seen by students as interesting and useful to their lives. I know that's hard, but we have to really think about that. You want to really talk about the apathy that's happening in our country right now. And you want to ask your students, like, how do we overcome these obstacles and think beyond now? How do we prevail over this apathy? And talking about mental health is an important step. Administrators should really rely on their school counselors to support students with education about their mental health. Defining, explaining, and speaking honestly about feelings is so therapeutic and creates empathetic and compassionate young people. So this is a student slide that I put together about stress and anxiety, and this relates so much to us right now because it says anxiety does not come from thinking about the future, but from wanting to control it. We can't control it right now. So everyone's anxiety levels are going to be a lot higher than usual. It's critical that students know how to self-monitor and regulate their feelings. Most importantly, they need to know when to ask for help. So by providing information on mental health, they become better self-advocates and friends to people around them that are afraid to speak out. And healthy stress and anxiety is important to talk about right now. The level of stress and anxiety in people's homes vary, and we cannot control the type of modeling behavior that is happening at home with a sick or unemployed parent that's struggling with paying the rent or putting food on the table. This slide is important because I use it to talk about cell phones and how they can keep the human brain in this constant state of anxiety, like this anticipation of the next notification. We can really relate this to our experience during the school closure. There is an impending sense of doom with many students. They're always ready for more bad news, and they just never feel any relief around it. And same with adults as well. So sleep was a subject matter that entered every conversation with students during the school closure, with parents kind of scrambling to maintain some sense of control over their jobs and home. Many of our students became vampires, literal vampires. They lost their natural body rhythms and wondered why they felt so terrible. Students also became kind of bedridden by choice. It became critical to make sure students got on a regular sleep pattern and found places in their home to do homework. And that was not their beds. You know, our bodies are, that they get into patterns that are powerful and we're not in charge. And so if your brain relates, homework or gaming or reading or anything not related to sleep with your bed, then it's going to be hard to get your brain to relax. As a school counselor, one of my biggest challenges was making sure my students with 504s and IEPs were being served. We worked with our teachers to create some really unique and creative accommodations. And so I felt really fortunate to have that camaraderie with my peers. And I felt very fortunate to have the hold harmless option for many of my students. But we'll need to be more mindful and prepared to support these students in the fall. Here are a couple of ideas that teachers can utilize in the digital classroom to support these students, but also support all students. So I think really avoiding all synchronous real-time delivery is a good idea. I think for our students with support plans, the ability to go back and look at a recorded lecture is really important. Also using closed captioned when showing videos or using multimedia is going to be really great for our students that may have processing issues or audio or video differences. And remember, less is more. don't increase the amount of work in reading just because it's an online class. You know, be really judicious and ask yourself, what is my single objective, and how can I have one or two things that show mastery in this. So my last two slides are about supporting teachers during digital learning. And I think it's really important because our teachers model behavior to our students. So we have to take care of their emotional health. Recognition and rewards are really nice and they're so appreciated. But really asking them how you can help their virtual teaching is important. Remind them that this is brand new. We're starting a new school here. And we're all flying and building the plane at the same time. And everybody's going to need help. You know, don't be a hero. There's some tangible ways to support teachers that I really like, which is administrators can create email templates for teachers, create scripts or parent emails or phone calls. We can send out surveys to check on the social emotional well-being of staff, I think is really important. Provide those announcements. And provide a space and time for teachers to come together and share. Also, supporting teachers with training assistants is going to be critical. Professional development is going to be so important. You know, and you can rely on school counselors for that, as far as like teaching teachers how to understand how to motivate learners, supporting students with social emotional well-being during digital learning. Also, teaching them how to enhance student learning without the presence of those visual cues, right? And really developing skills for communicating with parents and students over email, because, you know, nuance and word usage becomes very tricky. So I think these are going to be important skills that teachers are going to have to know, you know, when they're going through this. Okay, well, thank you so much. And this is the last slide to show all this. So summit sponsorships. And then there is a session feedback form located on the website.